Hi, thanks for joining me today. We're going to give some useful tips for installing a stove into an existing fireplace. Now, if your install is going to be a freestanding one, we suggest you watch the video, which we're going to do shortly after this one. So, to begin with, looks. You need a stove which you're going to want to like looking at. They're real useful sources of heating in the home, but they're going to be the feature of the particular room. So you want to make sure it's good to look at. Lots of different types of stoves, all shapes, sizes, handles, everything. So you can look at sort of a more traditional looking unit like this one here. So the black handle, brass knobs, cast iron door, cast iron body. Slightly more traditional, it still has a big glass. Or something like this one here, which is a signature 5 wide, which is even more modern. Stainless steel handle and a real big piece of glass and curved front. One of the most popular stoves this is, and as long as the panoramic as well. Something that's sort of in between the two, so you can match them up often with our stoves as well. So we do often offer lots of handle options. So this one's got the brass handle on and the brass knob just on the side there as well, which makes a modern stove look a little bit more traditional. And then if we set to this one here, this is more of the freestanding stove, but again, it's more of a modern look with a stainless handle and the grey finish as well. So as mentioned, there's lots of different looks you can go for, but if you can sort of nail down roughly what sort of style you're after and then move on to the next step. So the next step, output. Now I thought about this one and I thought this might not be applicable for everyone, but will be for many people. And my advice would be, ask yourself the question, can I get away with a 5 kilowatt nominal output stove? Now it might seem crazy for a lot of people who want a bigger unit, but the reason being is because anything over 5 kilowatt requires ventilation in the room. So it doesn't mean all 5 kilowatt stoves are the same though. For example, these two stoves here both have a nominal output of 5 kilowatt. Now manufacturers, including eCozy Stoves ourselves, which is our own brand, know this. So they'll make stoves to accommodate people's requirements and those rules. So these stoves here, both 5 kilowatts, like I said, but this one here has a much bigger range. Its range would be from around sort of just over 3 kilowatts to just under 8 kilowatts with a nominal of 5. So this is what we would describe as a large 5 kilowatt stove, which would be suitable for so many different applications, small, medium-sized rooms and larger rooms as well. So if you've got quite a larger room and a little bit worried, think you're going to need a bigger stove, but then think, actually, I don't want to have the air brick in the room or the direct air feed going out through the wall. You could be worth looking at a bigger 5 kilowatt stove, which is something like this. Now for many people, we think, I've got an air brick in the room, it doesn't matter, I want a bigger unit, then that's absolutely fine. You know, you can go for the real bigger stoves, like this one just over here, which I'm just pointing out now, probably going into shot, which is a big 10, 13 kilowatt stove. Gonna need ventilation in the room. But just going back to these two, brief explanation for it. So we class this one sort of as a standard smaller size 5 and a bigger 5. The reason is when they go through to the testing, you tell the test facility, I want the stove approved at 5 kilowatt. They put 5 kilowatts worth of fuel on it, and then you'll get the test based around that. And if the stove can be approved on 5 kilowatts, so meet all the efficiency and sort of the current standards, then it can pass. Now there is a limit to it though. You can only get sort of up to sort of the 7 to 8 maximums. When you get to the real bigger stoves, then the efficiency dies on the 5 kilowatt and they need the more fuel to get the approvals through. So that's quite a useful tip I think there, is ask yourself, can I fit a 5 kilowatt stove into the room? And then we move on to the next step. So hopefully by now you've decided what sort of stove looks wise you want to go for and the rough output that you're going to be looking at. Now we need to look at approvals, and most notably DEFRA approval. So the reason you need to look for a DEFRA approved stove is firstly, if you're in a smoke-free zone, London, Manchester, heavily built up areas, you'll require a DEFRA unit anyway. But most commonly the reason for a DEFRA approved stove is because you can install it with a 5-inch liner. Now it's quite important, if you've got an existing chimney and that chimney's all wiggly going up, it can be quite hard actually to get a 6-inch liner down the chimney. And many installers will insist you buy a stove which is DEFRA approved, so a 5-inch liner can be pulled down that chimney. So that's quite important, worth the check. To be honest, if you're unsure about your chimney, have any hesitations, buy a DEFRA-approved stove and fit a 5-inch liner. You don't want to be in a case where you're pulling a 6-inch liner down the chimney, it gets stuck, because you can't return it. It's going to be damaged, not damaged, but it's going to have dents on the outside and you can't return it. You're going to then have to buy a whole new liner. So if in doubt, always go for a stove which is DEFRA approved. Okay, so we've got the stove, looks sorted, the output of the stove as well, along with the deciding whether it's going to be a DEFRA approved stove or not. Now, fuel, what are you going to be burning on the stove? In most cases, people will just require a wood burning only stove. Many people think, I'll buy multi-fuel, I want to have the option of two, when in case it's actually better off to buy a wood stove if you really think the primary fuel is going to be wood. Because a multi-fuel stove will have compromises because it's trying to burn two different fuels that like to burn in different ways in the same chamber. Wood doesn't require any primary air. It requires just air over the top, whereas smokeless coal requires lots of air underneath. So that's where you get the grate and the ash pan inside a multi-fuel stove, which often people think, I want the grate and ash pan for that reason. And that's understandable, but generally speaking, if you want to burn the wood and the fuel which you're burning in the most efficient way, you want to make sure you're choosing the right type of stove. Most people, like I said, wood stove. So this is the signature white, same as a panoramic, it's a wood only stove. You will be burning the wood on the base here, no ash pan or grate required, and then you just let the ash build up and then just take a few scoops off the top. Helps it to burn for longer and prolonged burns on the stove. Now, if you had a multi-fuel stove, we don't actually have one here, but we'll just show you this unit as an example, which actually is a wood stove anyway, but it does have a grate and an ash pan in place. But generally speaking, you've got the primary air on the bottom here, which is this one here, and then you've got the grate and ash pan. As mentioned, that's because you like lots of air flowing up underneath for the coal to burn. So yeah, that's it with the fuel really. It's you really need to decide. If you're an established coal burner and you're replacing a stove, then yes, multi-fuel is great, go for it. However, like I said, in most cases, most people new to stoves are primarily going to be sort of burning wood. So that's that one. Hope that helps. And our final step is opening size. Now, a stove works in a fireplace by air flowing in around the stove, being heated up, and then back into the room. It's very often very tempting to get the biggest stove possible for the opening. You've got a 700mm wide opening, you want a 690mm stove. Isn't always the best way. Now, with a fireplace, it's a non-combustible material, it should be anyway. So there's no set regulations, there's also recommendations from manufacturers, and most manufacturers will suggest about 150mm either side, but this can be reduced. But bear in mind, when you reduce the distance either side, you reduce the heat output into the room. So if that was the case, here it is, the direct rear flue box. It doesn't fit on every stove, but it fits on the majority of our Hampton, Snug, Purefire, Ottawa models. You will have to double check. What it does is it sits on the rear and then the flue pipe comes off the top. So it'll actually kick the stove forwards and be more into the room. So it's quite useful for actually people who have got, if the chimney is quite tight at the back and the stove's right against the wall and it's tough to get the flue pipe up through the hole, it can be quite useful to put this on so the flue pipe can then go straight up and then push the the stove a little bit further out. So you're going to get a bit more heat into the room, which is quite useful. Something just to consider with that, you've always got to be careful of the hearth. You're always going to require a minimum of 225mm of hearth in front of the stove. So if you are doing that, you want to make sure you get the measurements right to make sure you've got that gap in front, or otherwise you are going to have to extend the hearth in front. It's also worth noting that if you are boarding out the fireplace with boards that are fully heat resistant, they may be fully heat resistant, but it doesn't mean they can't crack. Now, if you've got no airflow around the stove, what happens is the heat builds up inside there and you can crack those boards, which are then gonna either look unsightly and probably need replacing. So sizing's important, and there is a balance to strike, as mentioned with looks, because you want often a stove which looks good, but it's always worth noting to make sure you don't go for something which is too tight in there. Maybe just go for one, if it's no gap, just a little bit smaller, and have that kind of trade-off. I think that's about it. You know, there's so many things that we could talk about, but I just want to go across some of the key points and hope that helps you choose a stove. And any questions, we will be happy to help. Thank you.